Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk about a pretty interesting topic. It's a topic that people have been discussing since really the July show for Halo Infinite, and it's a topic that regardless of what evidence comes out for or against it, people still love to talk about it. And that is whether or not Halo Infinite should be a next-gen exclusive, whether or not it should be exclusive to the Xbox Series S and Series X and also PC, and not release on the Xbox One. There's a lot of evidence for and against this, there's a lot of opinions for and against this that I honestly kind of agree with both sides. So today I want to just talk about this topic. I was originally going to make this video right after Christmas, but I just felt like rounding the year out with a lore video, and it seemed to go down pretty well, so I'm not too bothered. So yeah, let's touch on this topic today. Now recently, this topic has flared up once again because people found one of 343's UI designer's LinkedIn accounts, the bio of which said that he worked on the Infinite UI for Xbox Series S, Series X, and PC. There was explicitly no mention of last gen, so everyone took that to believe that with the delay, the original Xbox One version of Infinite had been cancelled. But shortly, very shortly after, Unisec came out and basically just squashed this rumour, and the LinkedIn bio was changed, so this ended up meaning nothing. It didn't confirm anything. Halo Infinite is still coming to Xbox One, to the 2013 Xbox One, which makes for some pretty interesting topics of debate. However, even though this rumour was very quickly squashed, debate about this topic still lingers on because of two things, I think. Number one, the Infinite July showing not quite being what we expected on next-gen hardware. I think that kind of made everyone start talking about the Xbox One version and whether or not it should actually happen. And also something that happened recently, Cyberpunk 2077 and just the fallout of that game's last-gen version. So, if somehow you've been living under a rock for the past month and a half and you've somehow not heard about Cyberpunk, let me just give you a brief lowdown on the whole, fiasco with that game. So, basically, Cyberpunk is a showing of what happens when an ambitious game is forced to run on pretty much inferior hardware that is severely limiting to it. Cyberpunk, honestly, I think is a fantastic game. I've not finished it yet, but I've been playing it quite a lot. I've been absolutely loving it. The world is fantastic, the missions are fantastic, the story's really cool, the whole aesthetic of the game is incredible, but no one is talking about this. The entire narrative around Cyberpunk is focused entirely on how just god-awful the last-gen version of it is. People are glossing over the, in my opinion, vast number of positives of Cyberpunk that, again, in my opinion, vastly outweigh the negatives of the game, purely because of this last-gen port and just how terribly it runs, despite what CD Projekt Red has said. And I feel like 343 will be looking at this situation with an extremely highly powered magnifying glass just to learn from it and really use it as a learning experience for Infinite and how that game launches. Because the last thing Infinite needs is to be the Halo game that we all want, to live up to all of our expectations, but for the entire narrative around it at launch to just be focused in on a really bad last-gen version. It would really suck if that just weighed the entire game down, and I do imagine that 343 will be really using the Cyberpunk situation as a learning experience as to how not to market a last-gen game and how not to, more importantly, release a last-gen game. When you consider how ambitious Halo Infinite is, not just as a Halo game, but also as just a video game in general, I don't think that it's too far out of the realms of possibility for the Xbox One version to end up having a launch like Cyberpunk did. Not to say that that will happen by any means, but I don't think that it's too far-fetched to imagine that scenario. And I mean, people like to talk about this scalability thing, where pretty much a game is developed for next-gen and then kind of scaled down to last-gen, so it doesn't impact the next-gen version, and also the last-gen version runs well as well. But scalability didn't seem to help Cyberpunk, did it, really? So, not that that completely throws the scalability thing out, but it certainly doesn't make the scalability excuse seem as bulletproof as it once was. Obviously, 343 and CD Projekt Red, Halo Infinite, and Cyberpunk are very different games, very different studios that have been in development for different times. I'm sure they have very different styles of development, different budgets and everything. They're different styles of games. Obviously, they're not directly comparable, but I think it's very interesting to draw a comparison between the two. I think based on Cyberpunk, it's quite easy to make the argument now that Infinite should be limited to next-gen consoles and also PC, but it's not that cut and dry. It really isn't. I mean, one thing you've got to consider is how many people actually have next-gen consoles. I was actually kind of shocked when I saw the Xbox Series X and Series S sales figures. They really aren't as good as I thought they were going to be. I mean, they're selling out like that, mostly because of bots and scalpers, but they are selling out instantly. But at the same time, the sales figures really aren't that great. I mean, when you compare them to the PlayStation 5, and also I'm pretty sure if you compare them to the Xbox One as well, the sales aren't anywhere near what you'd think they were. And I really don't think that 343 and even more so Microsoft would want to limit the player base of the next Halo game that's taken like 6 years at this point to develop, or around about 6 years, a figure in that ballpark, and that has had so much money put into it and so much time, and that honestly is such a big deal for both Halo as a franchise and Xbox. They wouldn't want to limit that to such a small player base of people who were able to get their hands on a next-gen console. The majority of players for Halo Infinite will likely be playing on last-gen hardware still, and preventing such a large group of players who haven't made the jump to next-gen or who aren't on PC from playing Infinite would be really damaging in my opinion. I think that would be a pretty bad idea in terms of the game's popularity. Another thing that you've got to consider as well is Xbox's commitment to accessibility and how that would be damaged if they just pulled the cord on the version of Halo Infinite that more than likely most people will be playing. That said though, I do think there is a way that they could kind of circumvent this. So what if they did the free-to-play Halo Infinite multiplayer, the completely free-to-play aspect of the game that doesn't even require Game Pass, what if they had that on all platforms, all the OG Xbox Ones, the next-gen consoles, and also PC, but then limited campaign only to next-gen and also PC? Campaign is obviously going to be far more intensive and demanding than multiplayer because, I mean, it's semi-open world / open world, the environments are going to be huge, the graphics based on the pictures that we saw from the December blog are going to be fantastic. It's really where it can push the hardware of next-gen and high-end and mid-end PCs, whereas multiplayer is going to be far less demanding and intensive, so it could work theoretically. Although this would require them to kind of split Infinite into two separate entities, they'd have to have Halo Infinite Campaign and then Halo Infinite Multiplayer as like two separate entities, two separate executables, kind of like how Infinity Ward did Modern Warfare, come to think of it, how they had Modern Warfare as a whole package, and then when Warzone got bigger and expanded more, they kind of cut it off from the regular Modern Warfare, so you can play Warzone without having Modern Warfare installed. I guess with Infinite multiplayer being free to play, maybe they'll do that anyway for people who want to just play the free to play multiplayer and don't want to have to download a massive campaign and other modes that they can't actually play. Honestly, come to think of it, now that I've said that, it would make a lot of sense for them to do that anyway with the multiplayer being free to play, so it's not off the table, I guess. I feel like doing this would be a good way to strike like a perfect middle ground between giving people an incentive to buy a next-gen Xbox, but at the same time satisfying those who don't want to make the leap to next-gen or PC just yet by allowing them to play some aspect of Halo Infinite on their existing Xbox Ones. I think what it comes down to is that Xbox is desperately in need of like literally just a single exclusive for next gen. I mean, it's not surprising to see that the console didn't sell that well considering there literally wasn't a single exclusive at launch. And really, what better way would there be to do that than have Halo be to some degree an exclusive? It would really circle back to Xbox's focus on Halo and all the emphasis that Phil Spencer has put on the importance of Halo. Xbox is also in dire need of story-driven exclusives, like PlayStation has God of War, has Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales, has whatever you think of it, The Last of Us, and like plenty of other games like that, whereas Xbox doesn't, at least yet, doesn't really have anything, and having Infinite's campaign be exclusive to next gen would be a great way to kind of ease into adding more single-player exclusives. And honestly, the more that I talk about it now, I feel like locking the campaign to PC and next gen, allowing it to look and run as well as possible and just look absolutely next gen, wouldn't be a terrible idea. Obviously, we don't know the ins and outs of it, we don't know what the game looks like now, so maybe now the game looks fantastic on both old gen and next gen, so there's no need for this, but based on what we've seen so far, I don't think it'd be the worst idea. Ultimately, multiplayer could be the aspect of the game that is all about accessibility and reach and pulling in as many new players and existing players as possible, and then the campaign could be about kind of the opposite, about pushing the game to its absolute limits, having it look as good as it can possibly look and be the most next-gen experience ever, and really push the Slipspace engine to its limits. However, if they were to do that, one thing that I really wouldn't want to see is 343 have to make loads of sacrifices to get like the bigger multiplayer modes like Warzone and Big Team Battle and all that stuff to run well on last gen. I'd hate to see those big modes suffer, and whatever new big modes they decide to add in Infinite, I'd hate to see those modes suffer just to get them to run on 2013 hardware. That would kind of suck if that whole experience was really neutered just to get it to run on the old hardware. You've also got to consider that with Halo Infinite multiplayer, there are going to be players in the same lobby running on vastly different hardware. Like, comparing 2013 Xbox One hardware to, like, the Xbox Series X and high-end PCs is quite insane, and it's going to create quite an uneven playing field. And then this concern about the big modes as well only gets worse when you consider if they're going to have one like Warzone that they plan to support long term, how that mode is treated on last gen and new gen in the long term. And that brings me nicely to my next point that I want to talk about, the sort of long term of Halo Infinite and how it being a next gen exclusive or being on all hardware is going to affect that. It's a very interesting part of this debate, honestly, because 343 have made their plans very clear that they want Infinite to last for 10 years. It's the last Halo game for the next 10 years or whatever the official words they said. And when you factor in how exactly they're going to expand Infinite over time, and the fact that it's kind of at this point almost a given that we're going to get campaign DLC or story DLC of some degree, the answer to today's question becomes kind of clear if you ask me. I think that eventually, at least, last gen will be left behind. It's totally unrealistic to expect 343 to support 2013 hardware in like 2030, in 9 years time. I don't think they'll be doing that. And I mean, if you look at other games as like an example, GTA Online, for example, I'm pretty sure recently they ended last gen support for that because it just wasn't sustainable anymore. It wasn't running well on it, and all the new things they were adding just were being held back by it. So I don't see a world in which this doesn't happen at some point. It's really just a matter of when they decide to end last gen support. I'm going to go a bit armchair developer here, so just take everything that I say from now on with a grain of salt, because I don't know the ins and outs of this. This is just my opinion, purely my opinion. I do worry with this game. One of my biggest worries in general with this game is that the kind of last gen roots, if you will forever be present in the game and will kind of tie it down long term. They'll be forever present in the core of the game and will restrict things like, I don't know, this is really armchair developer here, but like world size and player capacity and maps and stuff, and the amount of scripts that can be run simultaneously. Things like that I imagine will be kind of designed into the core of the game, I think. I do worry that those things long term are going to be restricted by the game being developed for last gen. And I worry that if/when last gen support is dropped, Infinite won't become a truly next gen experience because those roots will still be there. And this really applies to all modes in the game. I mean, campaign, obviously, but then also, like I said earlier, multiplayer as well, like bigger modes in multiplayer, like Warzone and Big Team Battle and anything else they end up doing down the line. Like, I worry that hard limits are going to be put on these modes, and I don't know if they'll be able to just lift them as soon as last gen support ends. I don't know if it's going to be that seamless of a transition from being a cross-gen game to a next-gen game. But I imagine that is quite far down the line. I imagine we're quite a long way away from that happening. So maybe new tech will be discovered or discovered. You're not going to bloody mine to the center of the earth and find new tech to allow that, are you? Like, new tech's going to be created and innovated on that will allow that transition to be more seamless. But as of now, it is a slight concern, but it's really something that's quite far off in the distance, so I don't think we have to really worry about that just yet. So, not to make this video sound too much like an essay, but in conclusion, to answer the question of the day, no, I don't think, at least at launch, that Infinite should be a next-gen exclusive. I think that would be far too restrictive given the amount of people that have next-gen consoles now and that will have it when the game comes out. I think it would restrict the player base far too much and would really go against Xbox's commitment to accessibility. However, I do think down the line it should transition into a next-gen exclusive, like a couple of years down the line when 343 come to the point where last gen is simply too restrictive and it's not worth what they gain developing for it. I think at that point they should morph it into a next-gen exclusive, kind of like what happened with GTA Online. And honestly, I kind of think 343 will do this. I mean, it's very hard to see a world in which, like I said, in 2030, Infinite is still being supported on 2013 hardware. I don't see that happening. That said though, I do worry how each respective version of Infinite is going to be negatively impacted by the other, because really I feel like it could go both ways. I could see the next gen / PC version of Infinite being limited by constraints that are put in place kind of like in the core of the game to make it run on the 2013 Xbox One. But then at the same time, I could see last gen kind of pulling a Cyberpunk and being borderline unplayable because the game is being designed, partly at least, for next gen and it can't scale back very well on last gen. I could see that happening. Obviously, this is another topic that we'll have to revisit when we get last gen footage of the game and when we hear updates on how it runs on last gen. But as for now, those are my hopes and concerns for this topic. Let me know your hopes and concerns down below in the comments. Let me know what you think of this topic, what your answer would be, whether or not you think it should be next gen or available on all platforms. Let me hear it down below in the comments. And with that said, I'm going to bring the video to a close there. I want to give a massive thank you to Andrew Akridge and Blaise for becoming new Primordials over on Patreon, and to Alexis Soto and Jdog for becoming new Iconic ones. My friends, thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. Welcome to the club. And with that said, I want to thank all my usual patrons for the support over there, as per usual, and to all of you for watching, I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.